Welcome, everybody, to this week's episode of the podcast. I'm excited to have on this guest, Davide, and we have met recently. We've been having conversations over on LinkedIn, is how we met, and I'm actually super stoked to have him on this episode of this podcast. He's got a huge heart and passion for men, but I'm not going to tell you about that. I'm going to have him tell you about it. So before we jump into that, though, how you doing today, Davide?
I'm doing well, Travis. Thank you for having me on. I appreciate it.
Yeah, man, I'm literally so stoked that you're here and want to jump in and have this conversation. And I'm actually excited that you reached out to me on LinkedIn a few months back and just kind of initiated connection. But yeah, it's one of those things that the more I do this, the more men and women that I'm meeting that really that really care for men, that want to bring awareness around men's kind of holistic health, that want to create projects and avenues and create communities and use their expertise and their life to kind of make it better. So you reaching out, I'm very thankful that you did and that we get to have this conversation and that we've been talking offline. So can you tell us a bit about who you are, kind of what you're doing right now and kind of your life currently?
Yeah, absolutely. Before I say that, I do want to say a thank you to Kimmy, our mutual friend. She is the
Oh,
one who kind
oh,
of
that's
set up
right.
the connection and let me know that you are someone that I should talk to in the space. So just want to shout out
Yeah,
Kimmy
that's right.
for
Hi,
setting.
Kimmy. Yeah, we'll drop your stuff in the comments of the section. Yes, Kimmy's an amazing woman, and she's phenomenal. She's got a huge heart for men and fathers, and so I totally blanked on that. So thank you for dropping her name. So hi, Kimmy, if you're listening.
Yeah, exactly. No, Kimmy is great. She's a great educator. She's also been helping me a lot with a lot of the work that I have been doing. Right now, I am a senior at WashU. It's in St. Louis in the Midwest, and I'm studying psychology. And my passion I have found recently is in men's mental health,
Mm,
specifically with young men. Right now, the
mm,
project that I'm working on is creating a program for a local high school, actually my old high school that I went to, so a lot of memories coming up, going back to that school, speaking to some of the teachers about, what do the young men there need. And what we've decided is that we really need to create a healthy masculinity program for these
mm,
young men because a lot of the narrative, as you know, that young men are hearing is that masculinity is just toxic. And on the other side of the equation, they're hearing that, they need to go back to traditional values, Andrew Tate kind of vibes, that kind of thing.
mm.
And people are waking up to the fact that both of those are not very good options. And we need to show
Yeah,
them that there is a middle ground, and there's a middle ground, and they get to decide what that middle ground is, and they get to decide their version of masculinity. So that is the big project that I'm working on right now. I also have a podcast that is that talks about men's issues called Innovating Masculinity, but the big project that I'm working on right now is that program, doing research. Really, the research has been, interestingly enough, the most exciting part of it, which you wouldn't really expect. But I've just loved like getting into all of the papers and really finding out
mm,
what are the different components of masculinity that we can help young men with. And
mm.
I'm very excited to start implementing some of those and getting feedback on this program.
Yeah. It's so cool. It's more than cool, but that's the word that came to my mind. Cool. I'm from Southern California, so I use cool and dude a lot. If you're listening to this podcast, I haven't figured out. I mean, I'm assuming people know exactly where I'm from. It's like you don't think that you have a dialect or whatever, but then people are like, oh, you're from California. So cool. And I think hearing a quick glimpse of your story is that it's very encouraging to know that, guys your age, because I think what, 20? Are you 20? I'm guessing.
21. I'll be 22 in
Oh,
2 days.
sorry.
I'll be 22 in 2 days though.
Oh, happy pre-birthday.
Thank you.
So 21, but at 21, really having like this is resonating, speaking to you so much that you're saying, hey, we need to find this middle ground and really do something different. And that's so encouraging to hear because I'm 39, so a little bit older, but not too much older, but still a generation removed. And I have a similar passion too. We need to do something, but it's so encouraging to hear that at 21-year-old, almost 22, is thinking through this process and not only thinking through this process saying I'm going to do something about it because you're also hearing a narrative, which is different than the narrative I heard, similar, but I didn't have Andrew Tate when I was your age, right? I didn't have that. We had different people speaking, but hearing too that you're seeing this kind of dichotomy, this kind of black or white pendulum swing. It's either overly traditional values like a Tate, or it's just all toxic and bad and evil and wrong. And so it's kind of like these two extremes. And I really do agree that it is somewhere in between. It's in the gray. It's in the middle. It's somewhere in this space, not on these kind of edges, so to speak. And so a question that kind of came up for me as you were talking is, that you're loving doing the research. And I think that's so important that we do research, that we actually look at data as part of our process of understanding what it means to have maybe, a healthy masculinity or masculinities, or what it means to be a man. That I think it's important to take our experience, but also look at the data, what's it showing out there, and kind of taking both accounts into play. And so from the research you've been doing, because you've been diving super deep and kind of simmering in it, I think, for a while, what are some of the most interesting things you've discovered? Maybe the top two or three issues, or I don't know, insights or epiphanies as you've been doing the research. What are some of those?
Yeah, so I was actually doing a little bit of writing for an episode that I'm creating on my podcast that I really got the idea for while doing the research, and specifically this episode deals with risk taking. So we know
Mm,
young men across pretty much across all cultures, and I think across all age levels, but I know especially young men, they tend to be higher risk takers than young women. Obviously, as we always want to say when we're talking about gender differences in psychology, these are overlapping distributions. It doesn't mean that all men are higher risk takers. So just want to add that caveat in there. But
sure.
generally they are higher risk takers, and it leads to things like more car accidents, more drunk driving incidents, more accidental deaths. So men are actually dying at higher rates because they're taking seemingly out of control risks. But in the research, I found that in a meta analysis, I think it was from 2019, that young men that take more risks have more positive outcomes and more negative outcomes when it
Hmm.
comes to their health. So that really stuck out to me because I've kind of lived both sides of that coin. Like
Hmm.
I've I've taken the really stupid risks that have led me to kind of like some of these rock bottom moments where my health and my life was crumbling around me. But
Hmm.
I've also found myself, especially recently, taking a lot better risks that have led
Hmm.
to crazy positive outcomes like us, having this podcast episode, me creating this program. It's inspiring to me that this character trait can lead to very, very positive outcomes or negative ones, because all that means is that we need to educate men better on taking good risks. Like this
Hmm.
is obviously a place where we can have some influence. And if we can figure out how to encourage men to take the right risks to improve their lives, then we can have a really, really positive effect,
Hmm.
bring from like that super negative up to a much more positive just life outcome.
That is an interesting statistic. That I think what I heard in that is, what is the risk we're actually taking? Because it's, being a risk taker can lead to higher outcomes, but also, like you said, more negative. It's like it's more extreme on both ends. But so maybe it's more about the type of risk we're taking, and is it calculated? Is it intentional? Is it well thought out of the risk, right? Or is it just merely impulsive? I have a Mustang, and I want to, I'm 16 and I want to drive 120 with my friends in the back, right? Because that's obviously risky, high reward, but also high risk because I could get in a car accident. So maybe it's like you said, maybe it's about the type of risk, and am I thinking through it rather than just a merely impulse of just doing something without being well thought out.
Yeah, no, that is also the conclusion that I came to. Like driving in that Mustang, I mean, the thrill you're going to get from that obviously is the positive outcome, but the negative outcome is outsized compared to the positive. But when you look
Sure.
at something like, I mean, I give the example of like me creating my podcast. Like the risks, the positive potential for that is like
Mm,
I could theoretically blow up and become a famous podcaster. It doesn't mean it's going to happen, but the risk curve there is just way more in my favor, because like if I put it out there and it doesn't work, like the negative is almost zero. Like who cares if I make a podcast that doesn't succeed? Like it doesn't matter at all. But if I make
right.
a podcast that people love, I end up getting an audience, affecting a lot of men. And it's like you just have to choose the right risks. And I think that a
Mm,
lot of young men either aren't thinking about that, or nobody's really talked to them about that in a way that
mm.
appeals to them.
And I'm wondering, are you seeing how are you seeing that play out with, other guys your age in college? Like, what are you noticing when you see the research? Are you seeing it kind of mirrored? Is it skewed a bit? Is it like, what do obviously, and this is your anecdotal evidence of what you're noticing at your university, in your community. So, I mean, obviously, it's not going to be you can't take that and slap it on everything else. But I
Sure.
think it's important information that you're seeing in your friend groups and in your classes and who you're interacting with. Are you seeing kind of some similarities there, or not so much?
No, I would say definitely. I would say definitely because in my first few years of college, I would say I was on the bad side of the risk taking equation. I was taking risks that were leading to more negative outcomes.
Mm,
That's also sort of the environment that I was in, and that's the people that I was around. And I noticed that, I was not as happy, and the people that were around me were not as happy and not quite as fulfilled. They didn't seem to have a purpose as much as the people that I'm around now, which isn't,
mm,
those people are going to necessarily be worse off. Like I'm sure those people are going to figure it out the same way that I have. Maybe they probably have already, but when I'm around people that like they want to take like one of my friends right now, he's making music. And he never was like a singer growing up, but he just decided to go all in on this music making thing. He's doing vocal lessons, doing all this stuff, producing songs. And that's a big risk, And
sure.
he's so fulfilled by the pursuit of that.
Yeah.
Whereas when I was around the people that were just kind of like, partying, getting drunk, like they weren't really fulfilled by like the drinking. They were just,
Mm.
I can't wait till the weekend so I can have another drink kind of thing. So that's how it's been playing out in my friend groups. And once again, like I'm not saying don't drink in college, right? Like I still have a few drinks every now and then. Like obviously have your fun. Make it a little bit more calculated. Choose the right time to really like really go for it.
Mm. Yeah, I think there's a story there for you, kind of a pre and post like moment of decision. Can you tell us a bit about kind of a little snapshot in a window of Davide and kind of pre this decision, and now kind of this journey that you had kind of have been embarking on or embarked on and have been kind of traveling on for maybe the past couple of years, it sounds like. Can you kind of tell us a little about kind of the moment of change or what shifted for you of like, maybe I got to be more calculated in my decisions a bit more, and because obviously it sounds like there's a story there. Yes.
Yeah, yeah, there absolutely is. I would say before my bottoming out, my rock bottom moment, I was probably drinking heavily, 3 to 4 nights a week, maybe 5 or 6 on the bad weeks. I was really tanking in school. I mean, like my grades were going down, and there was a period where I actually I had a lot of attitudes towards the world, towards myself that were just destructive, and
Hmm.
they were tearing me down, and especially they were tearing down the people around me. I was hurting people. I was harming, you know, my friends and people that I came into contact with because I was really just a loose cannon.
Mm,
And eventually, that culminated in a rock bottom moment for me where everything changed. And I had a moment where I was sitting in my dorm, and I thought to myself, I was like, I could either continue to become the person that I'm becoming, or I could make a radical change. And I took a few weeks off school. I think it was actually close to a month. I dropped out of several classes because I was pretty much failing them. And I really dedicated myself after that moment in my dorm room to changing things around because I had just made so many mistakes that had
mm,
hurt so many people, and something needed to change. And
yeah.
I got into a lot of like the self-improvement stuff on YouTube. Andrew Huberman, if you know who he is,
Yep.
he's kind of like my hero. He's the one who introduced me to this whole self-improvement game. Like his videos on anxiety and depression really helped me make some actionable changes. And from there, I've just started, slowly changing my systems, slowly
Mm,
changing the way that I think about other people, and trying to be a little bit more kind, trying to be a little bit more graceful, give myself grace, trying to be a little bit more resilient, and trying to just that are going to give me choose things that are going to be of service to others and myself, as opposed to just trying to take, which is
mm,
the attitude that I had before.
yeah. And what's kept you going on this journey so far? Like what, because we could have that rock bottom moment, and maybe we could have multiple bottom moments depending on the person. And sometimes we might make, and I've seen this in my clinical practice. Sometimes people make change for a very short time, right? In crisis, it's like, I need to change. And so they do. And then often what can happen is they revert back to old behaviors, old ways of thinking or doing. And so I'm wondering for you, like, what has kept you pushing past that point of like reverting? Like, what kept you, you know, fighting, taking a step? Like, what has that been for you?
Well, I would say I definitely had setbacks. So that's, it has not been a smooth journey. Definitely I have taken steps backward every now and then, but I think the thing really that's kept me moving forward is that, like, I just love this, like,
Mm,
I love the way that I feel, and I love the way that I make other people feel now as opposed to before. Like, I wish I could say it was like, oh, I just developed this, like, you know I mean, I definitely developed more resilience, but it's not just because, like, I got this, like, David Goggins mentality, like, you can't hurt me. Like, it really is because, like,
right.
it's just feels good. Like, it's just,
Yeah.
I just like this way of living a lot,
Yeah.
so much more fulfilled. My family, like, I just feel like I can give so much more love to
Mm.
my family and my friends and really spread that energy around as opposed to just being like, I don't know, like a vortex for, like, anger and negativity and all that, you know?
Yeah, yeah. And what you said is so key is that change is gonna come with setback. It's gonna come with falling still. It's like when you learn to ride a bike, you fall a lot. And so it's the getting back up though, of like, okay, I fell or I crashed again and I'm gonna get back up. And it's that moment of reassessment because it isn't just a nice clean linear line of like, okay, I'm just moving forward. It doesn't that was even in my story. Like it's kind of like you have this awareness, you do well, and then you kind of get stuck in some old ways of thinking or behaving, and then you catch it though, right? You catch it faster. And that's the most important thing is the catching, I think, is because what we can do is I think where people can get stuck is where they fall off their bike, but then they stay and they're like, well, that didn't work, or I'm a failure anyway, I'm gonna fall anyway. So they kind of beat themselves up because they made a mistake because they think they should be perfect. They're like, well, it didn't work out for me. It wasn't, see, I couldn't last, right? Or I couldn't keep pushing and I'm not strong enough to keep moving. And so they get kind of psych themselves out rather than, hey, okay, you did fall or have a setback or maybe engage in some old behavior that wasn't so productive or effective. And what happens is that critical voice will come in and that shame will come in and they'll kind of get crushed by it rather than you're right, I did acknowledging it and saying, okay, here's what I did. Here's why I went awry and here's how I can learn from it and recover faster, versus just staying stuck. Cause I think that's why I see a lot of people get stuck there is that like they expect to not have those setbacks. They expect to, hey, I'm on this journey of health, healing, whatever you want to call it. And it should just be, rainbows, sunshine, and unicorns.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. You think that because, like, we're not aware of our unconscious thoughts and behaviors. So
Right.
as soon as we make a conscious decision that we want to change, we're like, okay, like, all of the thinking part of me is saying I want to change and I want to, do everything differently. The rest of you, the rest of your unconscious thoughts and behaviors, like, they're on a totally different system.
Yeah.
And the thing you said about perfectionism is very true, that I've had to overcome that. And I think one of my favorite quotes about perfectionism is that perfectionism is an excuse for people to stay lazy. If you're a perfectionist, then if you don't think you can do it perfectly, then you don't do it at all. And
Yeah.
that's just one of those mindsets I've had to throw right out the window because this whole thing is an experiment. Like, there's going to be failures. If you can't do it perfectly, you're human. That doesn't mean you can't do it at all.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think that's a great quote, and I've also seen it in my practice that perfectionism is a defense mechanism. It's a fear, right? In order for me to survive, it must be perfect because it helps me avoid pain or hurt or rejection or whatever. And so, I think one perspective is lazy, and I think the other perspective that I've seen is it's about survival. It's an ineffective response because inevitably no one's perfect, but it's that lie. It's like, well, I have to be perfect in order to be accepted, to be lovable, have value, to have worth, to be productive. And that can be that's the lie of it is it's a trap, right? It keeps you stuck and it can lead to laziness or avoidance because if I'm not perfect, then I won't do it. But it really deep down is kind of like this fear. And perfectionism, I think, is a way of trying to control from further harm.
Yeah. No, I think you hit it on the head right there. Like, you need to, like, there's something secure about everything being perfect. And we're
Yeah.
so obsessed with, security and comfort. And I still fall back into that pattern of like, sometimes I'm like, if I don't have my list for the day where I'm like, this is what I'm going to do, I sometimes don't want to get out of bed, but it's like, just get up and try and do
Mm.
something,
Yeah.
even if it's very insignificant, like just get up and try and do something.
Yeah. Yeah. And that's good. Sometimes that is the victory, is just do something, right? Just start, right? And in that, maybe you've noticed the starting process some days is that's all you can do. It's like, okay, I did something. And maybe other days that starting process really might snowball into a positive movement.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, honestly, this like even this morning, like I woke up and I got a little bit of light in my eyes, got a little bit of sunlight, and then I was like, I'm not feeling it. I went back to sleep for a little bit. And
Yeah.
then but I did get back up out of bed and I didn't let the shame kind of like hold me there for too long and, step forward,
Yeah.
step back, step forward again.
Yeah. That's awesome, man. That's I think more a realistic view of what it often looks like for a lot of people. Is it, there are days that you wake up ready to go and like, sure, let's get at it, and feeling confident, good. But I think more often than not, it's that other initial internal fight of, what's creeping in right now in this moment. Is it shame? Is it my belief system? Is it fear? Is it worry? Is it perfectionism? And how quickly it's not like it's a big leap sometimes just to kind of stay stuck. It's very, it's like a baby step to either go towards staying stuck and buying into that kind of negative cycle, or even a baby step of moving toward growth and movement. It's subtle sometimes. It's very subtle. It's like it's all here. And I think of one of my favorite quotes from Viktor Frankl from the book Man's Search for Meaning, and I believe that's where he said it. But he said, in between, stimulus and response, there lies a space, and in that space lies our freedom, our capacity to choose our response to any given set of circumstances. So it's stimulus response right there. And that's such a small, quick space because when a stimulus happens, we can have an automatic response and it's almost like there is no gap. It's like very tiny. But I think with practice, we become more aware of that space of like, okay, this is happening and I'm aware now and I have the agency and capacity to choose my middle path here rather than maybe falling on these extremes, whatever that might look like for me.
I love that quote. I know I've heard of that book before, but I've never heard that quote. That one's fantastic because yeah, space is something I've been trying to find a lot more recently. So
Mm.
I really like that quote.
And I'm wondering with this question as I'm thinking through with all the work you're doing, and we'll kind of sit with this and then kind of look at kind of closing out the show. But with all your own personal story, along with your research on kind of healthy masculinities and the middle path, kind of creating this program for your old high school, which I think is stellar. Like, hey, I see a need here, I want to fill it. I'm wondering when you think of integration and being integrated with all the work you're doing, what do you hear and how does that look with the work that you are doing in this realm?
Yeah, so when I hear the word integration, my mind really jumps to like combining something, bringing something into the fold, like
Mm,
taking something that's currently outside of the system and bringing it into the greater picture and
mm,
really making it a part of, your message or your vision. So when I think about the program, I'm thinking about how to integrate that program into the school system that those kids currently are in. I'm
mm,
not coming in there trying to just give them some I don't know random program on healthy masculinity that isn't gonna be
mm,
combined with the rest of their curriculum and the rest of the stuff that they're learning about. It really needs to be integrated into that school's message and
mm.
vision. So
Yeah.
when you told me about the new name for the podcast, I just thought like an integrated man is a man who brings things into himself that he knows that he
Mm,
needs and someone
mm,
that understands that there are constantly things that I need to be adding
mm.
to my being in order to make me more fulfilled or be a better husband or a better brother or a better son. And
Yeah.
yeah, that's what integration really means to me from when you first said it and then also when I've just thought about it in my own life.
Yeah. And I wonder when you think about that and kind of the narratives of the day, how does integration kind of what you just said, what does that offer differently than like the Andrew Tates of the world or hey, everything's toxic. being masculinity itself is toxic. So what does that look like, and what do you hear as a kind of an offering, so to speak, in opposition to these other narratives?
Yeah, that's a great point. I didn't even think about it that way, but the toxic masculinity or the Andrew Tate camps, they both they're not big on integrating new ideas. Like they're
Mm,
very set in their ways. They're either
yeah,
traditional or they're anti-traditional. Everything's bad, everything's. So in that sense, like the middle way is really to integrate some of the good things from both of those sides, because like toxic masculinity, they obviously have a point. We can look
right,
at the numbers on interpersonal violence and domestic abuse and all these different things. There's obviously something wrong with the way conducting themselves. At the same time, you look at Andrew Tate, and like he has empowered a lot of men to like not be lonely and depressed. And
sure,
obviously he's done that in ways that I don't agree with, but we still have to take a look at what has been so appealing and try
mm,
and figure out how we can craft a message that's appealing in the same way but has different underlying values. So
yeah,
I think
yeah,
that's what we're all about, is integrating in the good from wherever we can find it, regardless
yeah.
of who we can really find it from.
Yeah. And I like your perspective, because actually I didn't think of it in that way, like the way you framed it in my head, and process of thinking through what it means to be an integrated man. But I love it. It really is constantly learning and open to new ideas. And how do I integrate this into my overall well-being, and even your program? It's like I'm not just trying to come in and say, here, do this, but it's really seeking to understand the context to which you find yourself in. And in this case, the high school, right? And understanding their story, their strengths, their areas, and saying, how do I bring something in that isn't just trying to shove it and make it fit, but work toward an understanding so I can collaborate and bring this idea as a way of enhancing what they are doing. And so I love that perspective. Is like it does take curiosity to understanding what you're doing and where you are. And it's going to obviously vary, whether it's a high school or in your own life or with your family or with your work, that it takes a level of observation and research, so to speak, to garner information to say, how do I bring this in, and what do I need to bring in, which is also, I think, speaks, if you think of the toxic or the Andrew Tate, that also I think would be anti those viewpoints of looking at saying, what do I need to, what do I need to bring into my life? Because I think to say that would to admit weakness, and to say, well, that's not manly to say you need something outside of
Mm,
yourself, right? I that's what I heard too when you said that. Is like I think that would very much in those camps would say, no, you don't need that, because to do that is to show weakness and vulnerability and all those things. And so I love your perspective. I think that's so key and so important, that we need to understand the context, the business, the person, the relationship, whatever it is, to then integrate well. And I think health to do it well. I think of too when people have surgery and they get like a transplant, right? They really got to make sure it matches, right? The blood type and everything. Because if
yeah.
you just want to shove in a kidney that's not the right blood type, the body's going to reject it, right? But well, they need a kidney, or they need you could shove it in there, and like it'll probably, they could sew it up, but there's gonna be complications, right? So it's like we need to make sure. That's why they're so key on, is the blood type the same, and is it a match? Because if it's not, then you're wasting your time and making and causing more damage. And so we really got to do our research to understand, what does this person or this thing need. So I'm stoked to hear the finalized product when that's done. Because I know we've talked offline about that, and I'm like, that I think it's really cool you're doing it, and I can't wait to hear kind of what it looks like, and the program and everything else. But as we start to wrap up, one, what music is currently inspiring you right now?
Music.
Hmm. What
Oh,
or what are you spinning right now, or what's kind of what's been playing on your playlist, kind of on repeat for the past week
sure,
or so?
sure. I would say I get really one track minded with music. So right now I'm big in my country phase.
Okay.
Music is kind of my deal right now. Luke Combs, any of the new country people. I just love them. But I've
Okay.
also been listening a little bit of classical music, and I just put on like this classical playlist, and there was one that was just, oh man, it was like the intro was just hitting me. So a little bit of classical, a little bit of country, a
Nice.
little bit of kind of like that kind of weird like healing music stuff. I'll just throw that on when I'm doing like meditation.
Weird healing music.
Yeah,
I'm
it's like
sure.
oh, what is it? It's like I'm not gonna try. I'm not gonna try and recreate it right now. But like, there's no vocals on it. It's just kind of like that,
Like
like
ambient or
yeah,
yeah,
yeah, ambient or something like something that just kind of is playing and is supposed to like raise your vibration state or whatever.
sure.
I don't
Okay.
know if it actually does that, but it sounds good though. It sounds
Okay.
good when I'm meditating.
I love it. I'll have to Google weird healing music and see what pops up. unless there's a unless there's a playlist of an artist you found that's good, and you could obviously feel free to share. But I'm just thinking what might pop up in my Google search if I do that.
Yeah, you better
Um,
be careful with that. Yeah.
I probably should be careful, like put, I don't know, some blockers on or something. And the last, question is where, with the work you're doing, where can we find you and all that you're doing?
Sure. So the podcast is called Innovating Masculinity. You can find that on all platforms: Spotify, Apple Music. I am currently only on LinkedIn. That's Davide, spelled like David E. J. Pace, spelled Pace. I'm making the jump to Instagram here in the next week or so. So that will be coming as well. Besides that, I'm not really on any other socials. I kind of trying to keep it minimalist. So that's where you can find me, and hopefully the program will be coming to a school near you somewhere in these next like 5 years as we look to scale it. So
Hey,
yeah.
well, I would love to be able to look back on this episode, 5 years from now and say, hey, this is Davide had this vision and he's been implementing it. Now, look, it's a program that is really helping boys and men and teens to kind of have a healthier masculinities. So I think that'd be cool. I would love to be able to look back on this and say, hey, look at that. Look at Davide back then and
Hell
5 years
yeah.
later. Yeah, that'd be really cool. So, and everyone listening, his links will be all directly down here, clickable to the episode, to his podcast, to his LinkedIn account. Everything's clickable below. Davide, thank you so much for your time, and I'm excited. And we're gonna have to actually, we should have a follow up in a few episodes, maybe in a month or two from now, and check in with how the process is going and all the new research you're finding, as well as what you are integrating. So, hey, man, blessings to you today, and we'll talk soon.
Appreciate it, Travis. Have a good one.